The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty ranch house, and Zelda Sutton gripped the worn leather seat as her heart hammered against her ribs, wondering if accepting this position as governess to a rancher's niece had been the worst decision of her 22 years. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the sprawling property outside Ventura, and she could see cattle dotting the golden hills in the distance, their shapes shimmering in the afternoon heat of this August day in 1878. She smoothed her navy traveling dress and adjusted her bonnet, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach as the driver opened the door and extended his weathered hand. "Miss Sutton, we have arrived at the Riverside Ranch," he announced, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over hoofbeats and wind. Zelda accepted his assistance and stepped down onto the hard, packed earth, her boots raising small clouds of dust. The ranch house stood 2 stories tall, painted white, but showing signs of wear from the coastal winds that swept inland from the Pacific. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and she noticed a rocking chair swaying slightly in the breeze, as though someone had just vacated it. Wooden fences stretched in every direction, corralling horses that whinnied and tossed their manes. The scent of hay, leather, and livestock filled her nostrils, so different from the Boston boarding house where she had lived these past 4 years while teaching at Miss Harrington's Academy for Young Ladies. The front door swung open, and a man emerged who made Zelda's breath catch in her throat despite her determination to remain professional. Ethan Rourke stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in the way of men who spent their days in the saddle. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar of his chambray shirt, and his eyes were the color of whiskey in sunlight, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away and stare simultaneously. A day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and his hands, she noticed as he removed his hat, were calloused and strong. "Miss Sutton," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her chest. "I am Ethan Rourke. I appreciate you making the journey all the way from Boston. My niece is in need of proper guidance, and your credentials were impressive." Zelda found her voice, though it sounded breathier than she would have liked. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Rourke. I am eager to meet your niece and begin her instruction." Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite identify. Sadness, perhaps, or regret. "Clara is 8 years old and has been without a mother for 2 years now. My sister passed from fever, and her husband could not bear to raise the child alone. He left for the gold fields up north and has not been heard from in over a year. I took Clara in, but running a ranch does not leave much time for teaching a girl her letters and manners." The pain in his words touched something deep inside Zelda, and she felt her professional reserve soften slightly. "I am truly sorry for your loss and for Clara's. Losing a mother at such a tender age must be devastating." Ethan nodded and gestured toward the house. "Let me show you inside. Clara is supposed to be in her room, but she has a tendency to wander. The child is bright but willful, and I confess I have not known how to handle her grief. She barely speaks some days, and others she is wild as a mustang." Zelda followed him up the porch steps, noting the way his boots thudded against the wooden planks, and how he held the door for her with an old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. The interior of the house was cooler, with thick adobe walls that kept out the worst of the heat. The furnishings were simple but well-made, sturdy pieces built to last. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, and she could see a kitchen area beyond, where a middle-aged Mexican woman was stirring something in a large pot. "That is Señora Alvarez," Ethan explained. "She cooks and helps keep the house in order. Her husband, Miguel, is my foreman." They have been with me since I bought this land 5 years ago." The woman looked up and smiled warmly at Zelda, her round face kind and welcoming. "Welcome, señorita. It is good to have another woman in this house. Too many men, too much dust." Zelda could not help but return the smile. "Thank you, Señora Alvarez. I look forward to getting to know you." A crash from upstairs made all three of them turn toward the staircase. Ethan's jaw tightened and he started forward, but Zelda touched his arm without thinking. "Perhaps I should go first. She may be less defensive with a stranger." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve and she quickly withdrew it, feeling heat rise to her cheeks, but he nodded and stepped aside. "Top of the stairs, second door on the left. That is her room." Zelda gathered her skirts and climbed the stairs, her heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. She had taught dozens of children, from the daughters of wealthy merchants to scholarship students who scrubbed floors to pay their tuition. Each child carried their own burdens, their own joys and sorrows. She knocked gently on the door before opening it. The room was in disarray. Dolls lay scattered across the floor, their porcelain faces staring blankly at the ceiling. Books had been swept from a small shelf, their pages crumpled. And in the center of it all stood a small girl with tangled blonde hair and eyes the same whiskey color as her uncle's, her face streaked with tears and twisted in defiance. "Go away," Clara shouted, her voice breaking. "I do not want another governess. I will just make you leave like the others." Zelda stepped carefully into the room and closed the door behind her. She did not approach the child, but instead knelt and began picking up the dolls, examining each one with genuine interest. "This one has a beautiful dress. Did someone make it for her?" Clara's mouth opened in surprise, clearly not expecting this reaction. "My mother made it, before she died." "Your mother must have been very talented with a needle," Zelda said softly, smoothing the tiny dress. "And she must have loved you very much to put such care into making this." The girl's lower lip trembled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "She did love me, and then she left." Zelda set the doll down gently and looked directly at Clara. "She did not want to leave you. Death is not a choice. It is a thief that takes without asking, and it leaves holes in our hearts that never quite heal. I know because I lost my own mother when I was 9 years old, just a year older than you are now." Clara wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "What happened to her?" "Pneumonia. 1 week she was fine, singing while she made bread, and the next she was gone. My father could not afford to keep me, so I was sent to a school for girls. I have not seen him in 13 years. The girl took a tentative step forward. "Were you sad?" "I still am sometimes," Zelda admitted, her throat tight with the truth of it. "But I also remember the happy times, and those memories are treasures no one can take from me. Your mother gave you 8 years of love, and that love does not disappear just because she is gone. It lives in you, in the things she taught you, in the way you smile or laugh or show kindness to others." Clara was crying in earnest now, and before Zelda could move, the child threw herself into her arms, sobbing against her shoulder. Zelda held her close, stroking her tangled hair and murmuring soft words of comfort. They stayed like that for a long time, until Clara's tears subsided into hiccups and sniffles. "I am sorry I made a mess," Clara whispered. "I just get so angry sometimes, and I do not know what to do with it." "Anger is natural when we lose someone we love," Zelda assured her. "But throwing things will not bring her back. What it will do is make your uncle worry and break things that might have been precious to you. Tomorrow, we will start fresh. We will establish a routine for your lessons, and I will teach you everything I can. But for now, why do not we clean up this room together?" Clara nodded and stepped back, wiping her face again. They worked side by side, restoring order to the chaos. Zelda learned that Clara could read simple words but struggled with anything more complex, that she loved horses and hated needlework, and that she thought her uncle was the bravest, strongest man in all of California, but that he sometimes looked so sad she did not know how to help him. When they finally descended the stairs together, Clara's hand tucked trustingly in Zelda's. Ethan was waiting in the main room. The expression on his face when he saw them was one of such relief and gratitude that Zelda felt her chest constrict. "Uncle Ethan, Miss Sutton's mother died too," Clara announced, apparently deciding this shared tragedy made them allies. "She understands." Ethan's gaze met Zelda's over the child's head, and something passed between them. An unspoken acknowledgement of pain survived and the strength required to keep moving forward. "I am glad you two are getting along. Miss Sutton, let me show you to your room. You must be exhausted from your journey." Zelda followed him back upstairs while Clara ran to the kitchen to help Señora Alvarez with dinner. Her room was across the hall from Clara's, smaller but comfortable, with a window that overlooked the paddock and the hills beyond. Someone had placed fresh wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, and the bed was covered with a colorful quilt that showed the careful stitching of many hours. "Señora Alvarez made the quilt," Ethan said, noticing her admiring it. "She has been excited about your arrival. As I said, not many women around here." He stood in the doorway, seeming to fill it with his presence, and Zelda found herself acutely aware of how improper it was for them to be alone together in a bedroom, even with the door open. She turned away, ostensibly to examine the flowers more closely, but really to hide the flush she could feel creeping up her neck. "This is lovely, thank you. And thank you for giving me this opportunity, Mr. Rourke. I will do my best with Clara. She is a bright, sensitive child who needs patience and consistency. She has taken to you faster than I have ever seen," he said quietly. "The last governess lasted 3 days before Clara drove her away with tantrums and hiding. The one before that made it a week. I was beginning to think I would never find someone who could reach her." Zelda turned back to face him, emboldened by his words. "She needs to feel safe enough to express her grief. Once she trusts that I will not abandon her, she will settle. It may take time, but I believe we will manage well together." Ethan studied her with those unsettling eyes, and she had the distinct impression he was seeing far more than she intended to reveal. "You are different from what I expected. The way you wrote, so formal and proper, I thought you would be stern. Severe, maybe." "I can be stern when necessary," Zelda said with a slight smile. "But I have found that children respond better to understanding than to harshness, especially children who are hurting." He nodded slowly, then seemed to shake himself from his reverie. "Dinner will be ready soon. I will leave you to freshen up. We eat in the kitchen, nothing fancy. Ranch life does not allow for much formality." After he left, Zelda sank onto the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her warm cheeks. She had prepared herself for many things on this journey west, for homesickness and culture shock, and the challenge of teaching a grieving child. What she had not prepared herself for was the visceral reaction she had to Ethan Rourke. The way her pulse quickened when he looked at her, the way she found herself noticing the breadth of his shoulders, and the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he almost smiled. She gave herself a stern mental shake. She was here to work, to provide for herself and to help a child in need. Romance was not part of her plans, especially not with her employer. Such things never ended well, particularly for the woman involved. She had seen enough cautionary tales at the academy to know better. After washing her face and hands in the basin and repinning her dark hair, Zelda made her way downstairs. The kitchen was warm and fragrant, filled with the scents of beef, onions, and fresh tortillas. Señora Alvarez bustled about, setting out plates and bowls while Clara sat at the large wooden table, swinging her legs and chattering about a new foal that had been born that morning. Ethan entered from the back door, having washed up outside. His hair was damp, pushed back from his face, and he had changed into a clean shirt. He caught Zelda looking and raised an eyebrow, and she quickly turned her attention to helping Senora Alvarez serve the food. Dinner was a revelation. The older woman had made carne asada with rice and beans, accompanied by warm tortillas and a fresh salsa that made Zelda's eyes water but tasted incredible. The conversation flowed easily, with Clara describing her day and asking Zelda dozens of questions about Boston and what it was like to live in a big city. Ethan ate quietly, but Zelda noticed he was listening intently, occasionally adding a comment or answering when Clara directed a question to him. "Miss Sutton, can you ride a horse?" Clara asked suddenly, her eyes bright with interest. "I am afraid I never learned," Zelda admitted. "In Boston, we traveled by carriage or on foot." Clara turned to her uncle with an expression of such calculated innocence that Zelda immediately knew mischief was afoot. "Uncle Ethan, you should teach her. Everyone needs to know how to ride a horse, especially here. What if there was an emergency and Miss Sutton needed to get somewhere quickly?" Ethan's lips twitched, the closest Zelda had seen him come to a real smile. Clara has a point. Ventura is not Boston. A woman who cannot ride is at a disadvantage. If you are willing, I could give you lessons in the early morning, before the day gets too hot and before Clara's studies begin. Zelda felt trapped by the logic even as her traitorous heart leaped at the prospect of spending time alone with him. "I would not want to impose on your time. I am sure you have many responsibilities." "I am up before dawn anyway," he said with a shrug. "And it would give me peace of mind knowing you could manage a horse if needed." "Please, Miss Sutton," Clara pleaded, clasping her hands together. "It will be such fun, and Uncle Ethan is the best rider in all of California." "I doubt that is true," Ethan said dryly, but there was warmth in his voice when he looked at his niece. Zelda found herself agreeing, though a warning voice in her head suggested this was unwise. But what harm could come from learning a practical skill? She would simply have to maintain her professionalism and remember her place. The days that followed established a rhythm that Zelda found both satisfying and dangerously pleasant. She rose before sunrise and met Ethan at the stables, where he introduced her to a gentle mare named Daisy. Those early morning lessons were quiet, intimate affairs, with only the sounds of the horses and Ethan's low voice guiding her through the basics of horsemanship. His hands were careful when he helped her mount, steadying her waist, and he was patient when she struggled with the reins or felt frightened by the height. "You are doing well," he told her on the fourth morning, walking beside Daisy as Zelda practiced holding the proper posture. "You have good instincts. You are learning to feel what the horse needs rather than just following rules." The praise warmed her more than it should have, and she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. But it was difficult when the rising sun painted the hills gold and pink, when the air was cool and sweet, and when Ethan looked at her with something that might have been admiration in his eyes. After breakfast, which became a communal affair with Senora Alvarez, Miguel, when he was not out with the cattle, Clara, Ethan, and Zelda all gathering around the kitchen table, she would take Clara to the small parlor that had been designated as their schoolroom. The child proved to be as bright as Zelda had suspected, absorbing lessons in reading, arithmetic, geography, and history with enthusiasm. She was less thrilled about penmanship and deportment, but Zelda made those lessons shorter and incorporated more of what Clara loved, using horses and ranch life as examples in her mathematics problems, and letting her write about what she observed around her. In the afternoons, when the heat was at its peak, Zelda would insist on a quiet hour where Clara could read or rest, and she used that time to explore the ranch grounds, always careful not to venture too far or get in the way of the men working. She discovered a creek that ran through the property, shaded by cottonwood trees, and made it her refuge when she needed time alone to think. It was there, 3 weeks after her arrival, that Ethan found her one afternoon. She was sitting on a large rock with her shoes and stockings off, her feet dangling in the cool water, her hair unpinned and falling down her back. She had not heard him approach and startled when he spoke. "I am sorry. I did not mean to intrude on your solitude," he said, but he did not leave. Zelda grabbed for her stockings, mortified at being caught in such a state of undress, but he held up a hand. "Please, do not let me disturb you. This is your home too, at least for as long as you are here. You should feel free to enjoy it." She hesitated, then slowly lowered her hands, though she could feel the heat in her cheeks. "I hope I am not trespassing. I found this spot, and it reminded me of a place my mother used to take me when I was small. There was a stream behind our house, and in summer we would wade in it to escape the heat." Ethan stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You are not trespassing. This is one of my favorite spots too. When I need to think, I come here." He gestured to the rock beside her. "May I?" She nodded, not trusting her voice, and he sat down, keeping a respectful distance between them. For a long moment they simply listened to the water and the rustle of leaves overhead. "Clara has changed so much since you arrived," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "She smiles again. She laughs. I had forgotten what that sounded like, and I owe you more gratitude than I can express." Zelda turned to look at him and found him staring at the water, his profile strong and somehow lonely. "She is a wonderful child. She just needed someone to see her pain and not try to fix it immediately. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, but they need to know they are safe first. You have given her that safety," he said, turning to meet her gaze. "And you have given me something I did not expect." "What is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hope. The belief that things could be better, that this house could feel like a home again instead of just a place we all exist in our separate grief." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch, and she knew she should look away, should say something to lighten the mood and restore the proper boundaries between them. But she could not seem to move, trapped in the moment like a fly in amber. "Ethan," she whispered, using his given name for the first time, and she saw something flare in his expression. He leaned closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite gentleness. "Zelda, I know this is not proper. I know you are in my employ and I have no right to speak to you this way, but I cannot seem to help myself. You have become important to me, more important than is wise." Her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to pull away, to remind him of propriety and the difference in their positions. But her heart, her treacherous heart, wanted nothing more than to lean into his touch and see where this moment might lead. "Uncle Ethan, Miss Sutton." Clara's voice rang out from somewhere nearby, shattering the spell. Ethan dropped his hand and stood quickly, putting distance between them. Zelda scrambled to pull on her stockings and shoes, her fingers fumbling with the laces. By the time Clara appeared through the trees, they were both standing several feet apart, looking in opposite directions. "There you are," Clara exclaimed, slightly out of breath. "I have been looking everywhere. Senora Alvarez says dinner will be ready soon, and I wanted to show Miss Sutton the kittens in the barn. The Mouser had babies last week, and they are so sweet." "That sounds lovely," Zelda managed, her voice only slightly unsteady. "Lead the way." She did not look at Ethan as they walked back toward the ranch buildings, but she could feel his presence behind them like a physical touch. Clara chattered on about the kittens, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air, and Zelda tried to focus on the child's words rather than the tumult of emotions churning inside her. The kittens were indeed adorable, tiny balls of fluff that mewed and tumbled over each other in their nest of hay. Clara picked up a black and white one and cradled it against her chest with such tenderness that Zelda felt her heart squeeze. "Can I keep one, do you think?" Clara asked, looking up at Zelda with hopeful eyes. "I promise I would take good care of it." "You would have to ask your uncle," Zelda said, "but I think having a pet could teach you responsibility and give you a companion." "Uncle Ethan said I could not have a pet until I proved I could be responsible," Clara said with a sigh. "But I have been doing all my lessons and helping Señora Alvarez and keeping my room clean. Do you think that is enough proof?" Zelda smiled and stroked the kitten's soft fur. "I think you have been doing wonderfully. Why do not we make a plan? For the next 2 weeks, you continue being responsible and helpful. If you can maintain that, I will speak to your uncle on your behalf." Clara's face lit up like the sun. "You would do that for me?" "Of course," Zelda said warmly. "But remember, if he says no, you must accept that decision with grace. Part of being responsible is respecting the authority of adults who care for you." The girl nodded solemnly and carefully returned the kitten to its mother. As they walked back to the house, Clara slipped her hand into Zelda's and squeezed. "I am glad you came here, Miss Sutton. I did not think I would ever be happy again, but I am. You make everything feel better." Tears stung Zelda's eyes and she squeezed back. "I am glad I came too, sweetheart. You have made me feel welcome and needed, and that is a precious gift." That night, lying in her bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Zelda could not stop thinking about those moments by the creek. The feel of Ethan's hand on her face, the look in his eyes, the unspoken promises that had hung in the air between them. She knew it was dangerous to let herself feel this way, to hope for something that could never be proper or acceptable by society's standards. Governesses who developed feelings for their employers rarely found happy endings in the stories she had read. But this was not a story. This was her life, and Ethan was not some distant, cruel master. He was a man who loved his niece enough to take her in when her father abandoned her, who worked from dawn until dusk to build something lasting, who looked at Zelda like she was something precious and unexpected. Could she really be blamed for feeling drawn to him? The answer, she knew, was yes. She could and would be blamed if anyone found out. Her reputation would be ruined, she would lose her position, and she would have nowhere to go. The thought was sobering enough to make her roll over and punch her pillow into submission, determined to get some sleep and face tomorrow with renewed commitment to propriety. But determination was easier in the dark of night than in the golden light of dawn, when she met Ethan at the stables, and he helped her onto Daisy's back, his hand strong and sure on her waist. She had graduated to riding without him walking beside her, though he still accompanied her on his own horse, a massive bay gelding named Thunder. They rode out toward the hills that morning, Ethan leading the way along a trail that wound between oak trees and patches of wildflowers. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air smelled of sage and earth. When they reached a small plateau that overlooked the ranch and the valley beyond, Ethan reined in his horse and dismounted. "I wanted you to see this," he said, helping her down. "This is my favorite view in all the world." Zelda stood beside him and felt her breath catch at the beauty spread out before them. The ranch looked small from this height, a collection of buildings and fences nestled among the rolling hills. Beyond it, she could see the shimmer of the ocean in the distance, and the early morning light made everything look new and full of possibility. "It is breathtaking," she said softly. "I can understand why you love it here." "I bought this land with every penny I had saved from years of working other men's ranches," Ethan said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "I wanted something of my own, something I could build and pass down. When my sister died and Clara came to live with me, I knew I had made the right choice. She needs stability, roots, a place that will always be home." Zelda turned to look at him and saw the vulnerability in his face, the dreams and fears he carried. "You have given her that. You are giving her everything she needs, Ethan. Do not doubt yourself." He met her eyes, and she saw the same hunger she had seen by the creek, the same longing that echoed in her own chest. "Am I giving her everything? Or am I being selfish, keeping you here when I feel the way I do, when I cannot seem to think of anything but you?" Her pulse thundered in her ears. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean, Zelda. I see the way you look at me sometimes when you think I am not watching. I see the way you blush when our hands touch. Tell me I am imagining it. Tell me I am alone in this feeling and I will never speak of it again. I will be nothing but your employer, distant and proper." She should lie. She should protect herself and her position and her future. But standing there in the dawn light with her heart in her throat, she could not bring herself to deny the truth. "You are not imagining it," she whispered. "You are not alone." The words had barely left her lips before he closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face as he kissed her with a desperation that stole her breath. Zelda melted into him, her hands clutching at his shirt, kissing him back with all the pent-up longing she had been trying to suppress. He tasted like coffee and something uniquely him, and she never wanted the moment to end. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I have been trying so hard to stay away from you to do the right thing, but I cannot anymore. I care for you, Zelda, more than care. I think I am falling in love with you." The words sent a thrill of joy and terror through her. "Ethan, this is impossible. I work for you. What would people say? What would happen to my reputation, to Clara?" "I do not care what people say," he said fiercely. "And as for Clara, she adores you. She has been scheming from the start to push us together, or have you not noticed?" Zelda blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" A rueful smile curved his lips. "The riding lessons were her idea. She has been leaving us alone together at every opportunity, making sure we have reasons to talk, to spend time together. She told Senora Alvarez that she is going to make sure you and I fall in love so you will never leave." Despite her confusion of emotions, Zelda could not help but laugh. "That little matchmaker. I had no idea she was being so calculating. She is 8 and has lost too many people she loves. In her mind, if we are together, you will have to stay. She is not entirely wrong." Zelda sobered, stepping back slightly to put some space between them so she could think clearly. "Ethan, I cannot make decisions based on what Clara wants or what we feel in this moment. I need to consider what is best for everyone involved." "Then consider this," he said, catching her hands in his. "I am asking you to give us a chance, not as employer and employee, but as a man and a woman who have found something rare and worth fighting for. I know it is fast. I know there are complications. But I have never felt this way about anyone, and I do not want to let you go without trying." She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his calloused fingers intertwined with her smaller, smoother ones. Everything in her wanted to say yes, to throw caution to the wind and embrace this unexpected chance at happiness. But years of training and the harsh realities of being a woman alone in the world made her hesitate. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to make sure this is real and not just a product of proximity and circumstance. Can you give me that?" The disappointment in his eyes cut her, but he nodded. I can give you time, but know that my feelings will not change, Zelda. Whether you take a day or a month or a year to decide, I will be here, hoping you will choose to take a chance on this, on us. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable one. Zelda's mind was whirling with possibilities and fears, trying to sort through her emotions and decide what she truly wanted versus what she thought she should want. Clara was waiting for them at the stables, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. How was your ride? Did you see anything interesting? Did you talk about anything important? Ethan swung down from his horse and gave his niece a look that was half exasperated, half amused. You are not as subtle as you think you are, little one. Clara's eyes widened in false innocence. I do not know what you mean, Uncle Ethan. I just want Miss Sutton to be happy here. Is that so wrong? Not wrong, just transparent, he said, ruffling her hair. Now go help Senora Alvarez with breakfast while I take care of the horses. The girls scampered off, and Zelda dismounted, still marveling at how much more confident she felt on horseback after just a few weeks of practice. Ethan took Daisy's reins, his fingers brushing against hers, and the spark that shot through her at the contact reminded her that time and thought might not be enough to quell what she felt for him. The next few days were a study in restrained tension. Zelda threw herself into Clara's lessons with renewed focus, and Ethan seemed to be spending more time out on the range, returning only for meals and the evening hours when he would sit in the parlor reading through ranch ledgers while Zelda sewed or read aloud to Clara. But she could feel his gaze on her, could sense the unspoken questions hanging between them. Clara, for her part, seemed to sense that something had shifted. She began finding even more creative ways to throw Zelda and Ethan together, from asking Ethan to help find a book on a high shelf when Zelda was in the library, to insisting that Zelda needed to see the new fence line Ethan had built, to developing sudden interests that required both adults to assist her. It would have been comical if Zelda's heart was not in such turmoil. She found herself lying awake at night, replaying that kiss in the dawn light, remembering the way Ethan had said he was falling in love with her. Part of her wanted to run to him and say she felt the same, that she wanted to build something lasting with him. But another part, the cautious part that had kept her safe and employed for years, whispered warnings about the dangers of following her heart. It was Senora Alvarez who finally pushed her toward a decision. The older woman found Zelda in the kitchen one afternoon, preparing tea, and closed the door to give them privacy. I hope you will forgive an old woman for speaking plainly, she said, her dark eyes kind but direct. But I have watched you and Senor Rourke circling each other like nervous horses, and I think it is time someone told you the truth. Zelda set down the teapot with shaking hands. What truth is that, Senora? That man has been alone since I have known him, working himself to exhaustion, caring for everyone but himself. And then you arrived, and I saw something wake up in him. Hope, joy, the possibility of a future that includes more than just work and duty. She moved closer, taking Zelda's hands in her warm, worn ones. I also see the way you look at him when you think no one is watching. You love him already, even if you have not admitted it to yourself. Tears sprang to Zelda's eyes. It is not that simple. There are rules, expectations. If I allow myself to care for him openly, people will talk. They will say terrible things about me, about my character. Let them talk, Senora Alvarez said with a dismissive wave. People always talk, especially about those brave enough to choose their own happiness. But in the end, what matters is what you can live with. Can you live with walking away from love because of what strangers might say? Or will you regret it for the rest of your life? The words struck deep, resonating with truths Zelda had been trying to avoid. She thought about her mother, who had married for love despite her family's objections and had been happy until the day she died. She thought about the years she had spent being careful, being proper, and how empty that had felt. And she thought about Clara, who had lost so much and was trying so hard to build something new from the ashes of her grief. "I am afraid," Zelda admitted, her voice breaking. "What if it does not work? What if I ruin everything?" "What if it does work?" Senora Alvarez countered. "What if you find everything you have ever wanted right here with that stubborn cowboy and that sweet child? Is the fear worth missing that chance?" Zelda wiped at her tears and took a shaky breath. "You are right. You are absolutely right. I have been so focused on all the reasons why this could go wrong that I have not let myself believe in the reasons it could go right." The older woman smiled and patted her cheek. "Love always requires courage, Mija, but you are stronger than you know." That evening, after Clara had been tucked into bed and the house had settled into quiet, Zelda went looking for Ethan. She found him on the front porch, sitting in the rocking chair with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the star-filled sky. "May I join you?" she asked softly. He turned, and even in the dim light from the house, she could see the wary hope in his eyes. "Always." She sat down on the porch step, her skirts pooling around her, and took a deep breath. "I have been thinking about what you said about giving us a chance. And I have been afraid, letting that fear guide my decisions. But I do not want to do that anymore." Ethan set down his glass and leaned forward, his full attention on her. "What are you saying, Zelda?" "I am saying that I care for you, more than care. I think I have been falling in love with you since the day I arrived, and you looked at me like I might be the answer to a prayer you had not known to speak. I want to take that chance, if you still want to." He was off the chair and kneeling in front of her so fast it made her breath catch. His hands cradled her face, his thumbs wiping away tears she had not realized she was crying. "I want more than anything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to court you properly, to show everyone that you are important to me. I want to build a life with you, here on this ranch with Clara, if you will have me." "I will," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. This kiss was different from the desperate one they had shared on the plateau. This one was a promise, a beginning, a commitment to try despite the obstacles. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "We will face whatever comes together. I promise you that. I will protect you and Clara with everything I have." "I know you will," Zelda said, feeling a peace settle over her that she had not experienced in years. "And I will stand beside you no matter what." They sat together on the porch for a long time, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams, about how they would handle the inevitable gossip and judgment from some quarters. Ethan told her about his plans to expand the ranch, to build something that could support multiple families. Zelda shared her dream of starting a small school in Ventura, teaching children whose families could not afford to send them away. "We could do that," Ethan said thoughtfully. "There is that old building in town that used to be a trading post. It has been empty for 2 years. We could fix it up, make it into a schoolhouse. I bet many families would be grateful for the opportunity." The fact that he was already thinking in terms of we and making her dreams part of their shared future made Zelda fall a little more in love with him. The next morning, Clara took one look at them at breakfast and let out a delighted squeal. "I knew it. I knew you would fall in love. Senora Alvarez, you owe me a penny. I told you it would happen before September." Everyone laughed, and Zelda felt her face heat with embarrassment and joy. "You have been betting on us." "Everyone has been betting on you," Clara said matter-of-factly. "Even Miguel. He said Uncle Ethan has been impossible to work with because he is so distracted by you." Ethan groaned and covered his face with his hands. "I am never going to live this down." but there was no real annoyance in his voice, only affection and amusement. Zelda reached under the table and squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that promised this was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Zelda's life. She continued teaching Clara, who seemed to blossom even more now that the uncertainty was gone, and she knew Zelda would not be leaving. Ethan courted her with a combination of Western practicality and genuine romance, bringing her wildflowers he picked on his morning rides, teaching her to shoot a rifle for protection, and sitting with her in the evenings while she read or sewed, just enjoying her presence. They took walks together after dinner, Clara often trailing behind them or running ahead to explore, her laughter ringing out in the twilight. Ethan told Zelda about his life before the ranch, about growing up in Texas and learning to ride before he could walk, about the death of his parents and his determination to make something of himself. Zelda shared more about her own childhood, about the years of loneliness at the school and the dreams she had nurtured of having a family of her own someday. "You have a family now," Ethan said one evening as they stood by the paddock watching the horses. "Clara already thinks of you as a mother, even if she has not said it directly, and I hope someday you will let me make it official." Zelda's heart stuttered at the implication. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I am saying that I want to marry you, Zelda Sutton. I want you to be my wife, Clara's mother, the woman I wake up beside for the rest of my life. I know it has only been 2 months since you arrived, and some would say that is too fast. But I have never been more certain of anything." Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and effervescent. "It is fast, but I am certain too. Yes, Ethan. Yes, I will marry you." He swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and she could feel the happiness radiating from him, matching her own. "Can we get married soon?" he asked, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I do not want to wait months for you to plan some elaborate affair. I just want to call you my wife." "I do not need an elaborate affair," Zelda assured him. "Just you, Clara, and our friends, something simple and meaningful." They decided to marry in October, giving them just over a month to prepare. Señora Alvarez immediately took charge of planning, declaring that the wedding would be at the ranch, and that she would cook a feast worthy of the occasion. Miguel offered to build benches and an arbor for the ceremony. Clara appointed herself as the flower girl and wedding coordinator, taking her duties very seriously. News of the engagement spread quickly through Ventura, and the reaction was mixed. Most of their neighbors were genuinely happy for them, bringing gifts and congratulations. But there were some who whispered that it was scandalous for a governess to marry her employer so quickly, that Zelda must have used improper means to secure the match, that she was a fortune hunter, despite the fact that Ethan's fortune consisted of land and cattle, not cash. The whispers hurt, but Zelda tried not to let them touch the joy she felt. Ethan was furious on her behalf and wanted to confront those spreading rumors, but she talked him out of it. "Let them talk," she said, echoing Señora Alvarez's wisdom. "In time, they will see that our marriage is built on love and respect, and their opinions will not matter. Fighting them will only give their gossip more power." He grudgingly agreed, though she could tell it galled him to let anyone speak ill of her. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the October air crisp with the first hints of approaching winter. Zelda dressed in a simple gown of cream silk that Señora Alvarez had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Clara wove wildflowers into her hair, her own dress of pale blue making her look like a fairy child. "You look beautiful, Miss Sutton," Clara said solemnly. "Uncle Ethan is going to cry when he sees you." Do you think so? Zelda asked, amused. I know so. He cried when my mama married my papa, and he loves you even more than he loved her. The simple certainty in the child's voice made Zelda's eyes well up. She pulled Clara into a hug. I love you, sweetheart. Thank you for bringing us together. You are welcome, Clara said, hugging her back tightly. Now you will be my mama for real, not just in my heart. The ceremony took place in the late afternoon, under the arbor Miguel had built and decorated with fall leaves and more wildflowers. About 30 people had gathered, neighbors and friends who had made the journey to the ranch. Ethan stood waiting for her, dressed in a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. But when his eyes met hers as she walked toward him on Miguel's arm, everything else faded away. The local minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through joy and hardship. Ethan's voice was steady and sure when he recited his vows, promising to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Zelda's voice shook with emotion when she made her own promises, but she meant every word with her whole heart. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Ethan he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was tender and sweet, witnessed by everyone who mattered to them. Clara cheered loudly, setting off a round of applause and laughter. The celebration that followed was joyful and boisterous. Señora Alvarez had outdone herself with the food, preparing everything from roasted beef to fresh bread to her famous flan. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing as the sun set and lanterns were lit. Ethan pulled Zelda into his arms for the first dance, and she had never felt safer or more loved than in that moment, swaying with him under the stars. Are you happy, Mrs. Rourke? He murmured against her ear. Deliriously, she answered, tilting her head back to look at him. Are you? More than I ever thought possible, he said, kissing her softly. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough cowboy who did not know what he needed until you showed up on his doorstep. Thank you for seeing past the prim governess to the woman underneath, she replied. For making me believe in love again. They danced until the stars filled the sky, and Clara finally fell asleep on a bench, exhausted from excitement. Miguel carried her up to bed, and gradually the guests departed, offering final congratulations and best wishes. Señora Alvarez shooed them toward the house with a knowing smile. Go on, you two. Miguel and I will finish cleaning up. This is your wedding night. Zelda blushed but let Ethan lead her inside and up the stairs. He had moved her belongings into his room earlier in the day, and she felt a flutter of nervousness as they entered together. But Ethan was gentle and patient, making her feel cherished rather than rushed. They consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, discovering each other in the lamplight, and afterward, lying in his arms, Zelda felt a completeness she had never known before. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, he answered, his arms tightening around her. Always. Life as Mrs. Rourke settled into a new rhythm over the following months. Zelda continued teaching Clara, but now it was as her mother rather than her governess. The girl had started calling her mama within a week of the wedding, and each time Zelda heard it, her heart swelled with love and gratitude. She also began working on her dream of starting a school in Ventura. Ethan had purchased the old trading post building, and together they spent weekends repairing and transforming it into a proper schoolhouse. Word spread, and by January of 1879, Zelda had 8 students from various families in the area, ranging in age from 6 to 14. She taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography 3 days a week, while continuing Clara's more advanced lessons at home the other days. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, and Ethan supported her completely, often helping with repairs to the school building or running errands when she was too busy. Clara loved having other children to interact with and made several friends among Zelda's students. In March, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and apprehension, and when she told Ethan, he picked her up and spun her around just as he had when she accepted his proposal, his face alight with happiness. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Clara is going to be a big sister." Clara's reaction was everything they could have hoped for. She danced around the kitchen, asking a million questions about when the baby would arrive and whether it would be a boy or a girl, and if she could help take care of it. Zelda answered as best she could, touched by the child's enthusiasm. "I have always wanted a brother or sister," Clara confided later. "After Mama died, I thought I would be alone forever, but now I have you and Uncle Ethan and soon a baby too. I am the luckiest girl in the world." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Zelda had to cut back on some of her activities as she grew larger. She continued teaching at the school until June, when Senora Alvarez insisted she rest and let someone else take over for the summer months. Zelda reluctantly agreed, and one of the mothers from town, a widow named Mrs. Henderson who had been a teacher back east, volunteered to fill in. The baby arrived on a sweltering August afternoon in 1879, almost exactly a year after Zelda had first come to the ranch. The labor was long and difficult, and Ethan paced outside the bedroom door, worry etched into every line of his face. Senora Alvarez and the midwife attended Zelda, and Clara sat with her uncle, holding his hand and assuring him that everything would be fine. When the baby's first cry finally rang out, Ethan burst into the room, not waiting for permission. Zelda lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, but her smile was radiant as the midwife placed a small bundle in her arms. "A boy," the midwife announced. "A healthy, strong boy." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, gazing down at his son with wonder. The baby had a shock of dark hair and seemed impossibly tiny, his face scrunched and red from crying. But to Ethan, he was perfect. "What should we name him?" Zelda asked, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. They had discussed several options but had not settled on anything definite. Ethan reached out and gently touched the baby's small hand, which immediately grasped his finger with surprising strength. "What about James?" he suggested. "After your father." Tears sprang to Zelda's eyes. She had mentioned her father only a few times, the pain of their long separation still raw. "You would do that. He gave me you," Ethan said simply. "That deserves to be honored. And maybe someday, if you want, we could try to find him, let him meet his grandchildren." The thought of reconnecting with her father after so many years was overwhelming, but in a good way. "I would like that. James Rourke. It is a strong name." Clara was allowed in to meet her new brother, and she stared at him with awe. "He is so small. Was I ever that small?" "You were," Zelda assured her. "And you will be a wonderful big sister to teach him everything you know." Over the following months, the household adjusted to having a baby. James was a good-natured child who slept reasonably well and seemed content to observe the world around him with solemn dark eyes. Clara took her role as big sister seriously, always wanting to help feed or hold him. Ethan was besotted, often found just watching his son sleep or talking to him about the ranch and all the things they would do together when he was older. Zelda marveled at how full her life had become. 2 years ago, she had been alone in Boston, teaching other people's children and wondering if she would ever have a family of her own. Now she had a husband who loved her, a daughter who brought her joy, a son who represented hope and new beginnings, and a community that had come to accept and respect her. In the spring of 1880, True to his word, Ethan hired a detective to search for Zelda's father. It took several months, but they finally received word that James Sutton was living in Sacramento, working as a clerk in a law office. He had remarried after Zelda's mother died and had 2 more children, but he had never stopped wondering about the daughter he had been forced to send away. The reunion was emotional and healing. James Sutton traveled to Ventura to meet his daughter's family, and the moment he saw Zelda, he broke down in tears, begging her forgiveness for not fighting harder to keep her. Zelda forgave him immediately, understanding as an adult what she could not as a child, the desperation and helplessness of poverty. He met his grandson, who had been named after him, and Clara, who charmed him completely, and Ethan, who he thanked profusely for making his daughter happy. James became a regular visitor to the ranch, bringing his new family to meet Zelda's. The 2 families blended surprisingly well, and Zelda found herself with siblings she had never known and a stepmother who was kind and welcoming. The wounds of the past began to heal, replaced by new connections and shared love. The school continued to thrive, with enrollment growing each year. Zelda hired 2 more teachers as the number of students increased, and what had started as her small dream became a vital part of the Ventura community. The building expanded, and there was talk of making it an official public school funded by the county. Clara grew into a bright, confident young woman, excelling in her studies and developing a love for horses that rivaled her uncle's. She helped around the ranch and at the school, showing a natural talent for teaching younger children. Zelda could see her following in her footsteps someday. James grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler who followed his father everywhere, mimicking his walk and his gestures. Ethan was a patient, devoted father, teaching his son about the land and the animals with infinite care. In 1882, Zelda gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace. She had Zelda's dark hair and Ethan's eyes, and she completed their family in a way none of them had quite expected but all embraced. Clara doted on her baby sister, and James appointed himself her protector, always making sure she had her favorite toy or blanket. The ranch prospered under Ethan's management. He expanded the herd, improved the breeding stock, and built relationships with buyers throughout California. The Riverside Ranch became known for producing quality beef and horses, and the Rourke name carried weight in the community. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Zelda back to the plateau where he had first kissed her. It was early morning, just as it had been that day, and the sun was painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. They stood together looking out over the land they had built a life on, and Ethan pulled her close. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your independence, tying yourself to a cowboy and his ranch?" Zelda turned in his arms and cupped his face in her hands. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me a home, Ethan. Not just a place to live, but a place where I belong." He kissed her deeply, pouring 5 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "You saved me, you know. I was going through the motions of living, working myself to exhaustion to avoid feeling the loneliness. And then you arrived with your proper manners and your compassionate heart, and you brought light back into my life." "We saved each other," Zelda corrected. "And Clara was our little matchmaker, pushing us together when we were both too stubborn or scared to admit what we felt." They laughed together, remembering the child's transparent schemes, and stood watching the sun rise over their land, their future stretching out before them full of promise. Years continued to pass in a blur of happiness punctuated by the normal challenges of life. There were droughts that tested the ranch's resources, and illnesses that frightened them, and disagreements that required compromise and forgiveness. But through it all, Zelda and Ethan's love remained constant, a foundation they could always return to. Clara grew up and married a young veterinarian who came to Ventura in 1890, a kind man named Thomas who shared her love for animals. They settled on a small property adjacent to the Riverside Ranch, and Clara continued to be deeply involved in both the school and the ranch operations. She gave Zelda and Ethan their first grandchild in 1891, a boy they named after Ethan. James followed in his father's footsteps, taking over more and more of the ranch management as he grew older. He had his father's work ethic and his mother's compassion, qualities that served him well in dealing with both the land and the people who worked it. He married at 23 to a school teacher named Sarah who had come from San Francisco, and they had 3 children in quick succession. Grace proved to be the family's free spirit, adventurous and artistic. She attended a women's college in San Francisco and returned with dreams of becoming a photographer, documenting life in the West before it changed too much. Ethan converted one of the outbuildings into a darkroom for her, and her photographs began appearing in newspapers and magazines, telling stories of ranch life and the people who lived it. Through all these changes, Zelda continued teaching, though she eventually handed over day-to-day operations of the school to younger teachers. She became a consultant and advocate for education throughout the county, fighting to ensure that all children, regardless of their family's circumstances, had access to learning. Her work was recognized when the state of California appointed her to an advisory board on rural education in 1895. Ethan remained her greatest supporter, proud of everything she accomplished, never threatened by her success or prominence. Their partnership was built on mutual respect and genuine affection, and even after 25 years of marriage, they could still make each other laugh and still found joy in simple moments together. On a warm evening in October 1904, the entire family gathered at the Riverside Ranch to celebrate Ethan and Zelda's 25th wedding anniversary. The house and grounds were filled with children, grandchildren, friends, and neighbors, a testament to the lives they had built and the community they had fostered. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting a warm glow over the festivities, and music filled the air. Clara stood to make a toast. Her own children gathered around her. 26 years ago, a very smart 8-year-old girl realized that her uncle needed someone to love, and that the new governess who had just arrived might be perfect for the job. So she did everything she could to push them together, and against all odds, it worked. Everyone laughed, and Zelda felt tears prick her eyes as Clara continued. "Mama and Papa, you have shown all of us what real love looks like. Not the easy, romantic kind from novels, but the hard, daily choice to stand beside someone through good times and bad. You have built something beautiful here, not just a successful ranch or a thriving school, but a family bound by love and respect. Thank you for giving us such a strong foundation to build our own lives on." Glasses were raised, and Zelda looked at Ethan through her tears to find him looking back at her with the same love she had seen that morning on the plateau so many years ago. "Dance with me," he said, extending his hand. She took it without hesitation, and they moved together to the center of the impromptu dance floor. As they swayed to the music, surrounded by everyone they loved, Zelda thought back to that day she had stepped off the stagecoach, nervous and uncertain about what the future held. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan. "For what?" he asked, pulling her closer. "For taking a chance on a governess from Boston, for seeing past my fears and loving me anyway, for giving me this life." He smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "Thank you for staying." for choosing us, for making this house a home and my life complete." They continued dancing as the stars came out, as their children and grandchildren laughed and celebrated around them. The ranch stretched out in all directions, a legacy they would pass down to future generations. The school that had started as Zelda's dream had become an institution that had educated hundreds of children. And at the center of it all was their love, the unexpected, impossible love between a cowboy and a governess that had grown into something enduring and true. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Zelda and Ethan walked hand in hand to the paddock, just as they had done countless times over the years. The horses nickered softly in greeting, and the night air was cool and sweet with the scent of hay and earth. "Do you remember the first time I brought you here to teach you to ride?" Ethan asked, leaning against the fence. "I was terrified," Zelda admitted with a laugh. "I thought I would fall and break something important, but you were so patient, so encouraging. You made me believe I could do something I never thought possible." "That is what you did for me too," he said, turning to face her. "You made me believe I could have a real family, that I could be more than just a cowboy working his land. You expanded my world, Zelda, in ways I am still discovering." She reached up and touched his face, now lined with years of sun and laughter. "We expanded each other's worlds. That is what love does. It makes you bigger, braver, better than you ever thought you could be." He kissed her then, softly and sweetly, a kiss that held 25 years of shared history and the promise of whatever years remained to them. When they pulled apart, they stood together in the moonlight, watching the stars wheel overhead, content in the knowledge that they had found exactly what they needed in each other. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Ethan gradually handed over the ranch operations to James, though he still rode out most mornings to check on the herd and the land he loved. Zelda continued her advocacy work for education, but spent more time with her grandchildren, teaching them and telling them stories about the old days. They traveled a bit, visiting Grace in San Francisco and taking a trip back to Boston so Zelda could show Ethan where she had grown up. But they were always happiest at the ranch, in the home they had built together. In 1910, Ethan fell ill with pneumonia. For several terrifying weeks, Zelda sat by his bedside, holding his hand and willing him to fight. The doctors were not optimistic, given his age of 58, but Ethan was stubborn and strong, and he pulled through, though he was weakened by the experience. "I am not ready to leave you yet," he told Zelda when he was finally out of danger. "We still have too much living to do." And they did continue living, cherishing each day as the gift it was. They celebrated the births of more grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. They watched the world change around them, with automobiles beginning to appear on the roads and electricity being installed in Ventura. The Wild West of their youth was fading, becoming something more settled and civilized. But at the Riverside Ranch, some things remained constant. The land still rolled golden under the California sun. Horses still ran in the paddocks, and Ethan and Zelda still sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and counting their blessings. In the spring of 1920, they celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family. Clara was a grandmother herself now, her hair streaked with silver but her smile still bright. James ran the ranch with the help of his sons, maintaining the high standards his father had set. Grace had become nationally recognized for her photography, documenting the transformation of the American West. That evening, as the celebration wound down and the family dispersed to various rooms in the expanded ranch house, Zelda and Ethan retreated to their bedroom. Ethan moved more slowly now, his joints stiff with age, but his mind was still sharp, and his love for Zelda burned as bright as ever. 42 years, Zelda mused as she brushed out her long hair, now completely white. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like no time at all. I would do it all again, Ethan said from where he sat on the edge of the bed. Every single moment, every challenge, every joy. As long as it was with you. She set down her brush and came to sit beside him, taking his weathered hand in hers. I never imagined when I stepped off that stagecoach that I would find this. A love that lasted, a family that grew, a purpose that fulfilled me. You gave me everything, Ethan Rourke. We gave each other everything, he corrected, just as she had all those years ago. That is what made it work. We were partners, equals, even when the world said we should not be. They lay down together, fitting against each other as naturally as breathing. Outside their window, the ranch was quiet except for the occasional sound of cattle or horses. The stars were bright in the clear California sky, the same stars that had shone down on their wedding night so many years before. I love you, Zelda whispered into the darkness, as she had whispered countless times over the decades. I love you too, Ethan answered, his arms holding her close. Always and forever. They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms. Two lives that had intertwined so completely they could no longer be separated. Two hearts that beat as one. Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep, 3 years later at the age of 71. Zelda beside him as she had been for 45 years. The loss was devastating, a hole torn in the fabric of her existence, but she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 7 years, long enough to see the Riverside Ranch celebrated as one of the most successful family operations in California, long enough to see the school she had founded become a model for rural education across the state. When Zelda died in 1930 at the age of 74, she was surrounded by family who loved her, in the house where she had found happiness, on the land that had become her home. She was buried beside Ethan under a large oak tree on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the inscription they had chosen together years before. Two hearts, one love, forever entwined. The Riverside Ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, each generation adding to the legacy while honoring the foundation Ethan and Zelda had laid. The school bore Zelda's name, a reminder of her dedication to education and her belief that every child deserved a chance to learn and grow. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the golden California hills and the wind whispered through the grass, those who knew the story said you could sometimes feel the presence of the cowboy and the governess, who had loved each other against all odds, who had built something lasting from an unlikely beginning, who had proven that love, when nurtured with patience and commitment, could weather any storm and create miracles from the ordinary moments of life. Their story became legend in Ventura, told and retold with each generation. The tale of how a proper Boston governess came west to teach a grieving child and found instead a love that transformed her life. How a hard-working cowboy who thought he was too rough and uneducated for romance discovered that the heart wants what it wants, regardless of social conventions. And how a smart, determined 8-year-old girl played matchmaker with the certainty that the two adults in her life belonged together, pushing them past their fears and doubts until they could see what she had known from the start. It was a love story rooted in the Wild West but timeless in its truths, a testament to the power of taking chances, of choosing hope over fear, of building something beautiful from unexpected beginnings. And though Ethan and Zelda were long gone, their love lived on in the land they had tended, the children they had raised, and the community they had served. An enduring reminder that sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never saw coming, delivered to us by fate and a clever child with a generous heart.